Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. So let's begin the discussion by looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 9 important articles for a comprehensive and detailed analysis so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. Now, before we start the discussion, I have an important announcement. If you're looking to enroll for Unacademy's online classroom program, you have a great opportunity as you can get a 1 year subscription at just 17,999 along with up to 12 months of free extension. To avail this offer, you have to enter the code IAS English, and this offer ends on the 11th of September. And if you go for 2 year plus subscription, then you stand a chance to enroll in our mains residential program if you clear the prelims exam. Unacademy will take care of your lodging and boarding expenses along with providing all the support needed for your mains preparation. And in case you don't clear prelims, in such a scenario, Unacademy will provide you a free access to the crash course for prelims and mains for your next attempt. So do enroll and make use of this opportunity. And if you're interested, click on the link provided in the video description. And if you want the PDF of this session, please scan the QR code on your screen and join our official Telegram channel. After the session ends, the PDF would be shared over here. So let's get started and look at the first article. On page number 6, the Hindu carries an editorial that deals with India's higher education sector. See, when it comes to higher education, the ranking of colleges and universities is something which is very, very important, not just for the students, but even for recruiters and even for the universities and colleges themselves. Because the ranking that is provided, if it is well calibrated and if the parameters are scientifically designed, and such a ranking system will actually help improve the quality of education as well. It will help improve the reputation of these institutions as well. Now, if you look at global university rankings, such as the popular QS World ranking, which is considered as a gold standard when it comes to university rankings. In the QS World ranking system, not even one Indian institution is present in the top 100. There is not a single university or institution from India which gets ranked in the top 100 in the world. Now, this tells you a lot about India's higher education system, the quality of resources available, the capabilities of these institutions as well. But there has been a criticism that these global ranking systems, they don't essentially account for the local factors. They don't customize themselves to suit the Indian conditions. So India has developed its own ranking for the higher education sector based on the National Institutional Ranking Framework, the NIRF, which was implemented in 2016 by the Government of India. So based on the National Institutional Ranking Framework, India brings out the India rankings, which basically ranks your universities and colleges across the country. So recently, India Rankings 2025 report has been published, and this gives you the list of top elite universities and colleges in our country in the higher education sector. So over the last 8 to 9 years, India Rankings has expanded. Initially, when it started, based on the NIRF of 2016, hardly around 3,500 institutions were part of the ranking system. But today, there are more than 14,000 universities and colleges in our country which take part in this ranking system. When the ranking process was started in 2016, only 4 higher education sectors were covered. Today, this has expanded to 17 higher education sectors. So India Rankings has become the gold standard within India to rank our universities and colleges. Now let's understand on what parameters are colleges and universities ranked under the NIRF framework? What is the weightage that is provided to different parameters? Is it scientifically designed? Are there any flaws in NIRF? And what purpose does it serve? This is what we need to learn. We need to understand this. So let's go beyond the article and let's understand the parameters that are used in India Rankings report, which is based on the NIRF framework. So if you look at the infographic to my left, you will see that there are 5 basic parameters which are part of this ranking process. The first and foremost is teaching, learning, and resources. Depending on the teaching resources, the learning resources which are available at the university, a university is given a certain number of points, and this carries a weightage of 30% in the index. Then we have research and professional practice. The second parameter, to what extent a college or a university is promoting research, innovation, and promoting the creation of intellectual property and professional practice at the college university level. This parameter also has a weightage of 30%. So combined together, the first 2 parameters account for 60% of this ranking index. So they have the highest priority because eventually this is what determines the quality of a university. The quality of the teachers, the teacher to student ratio, the resources available in the college for research, the opportunities being created for research and professional practice. So accordingly, these parameters have been accorded with the highest weightage. Then we have graduation outcomes with a weightage of 20%. That is, after graduating from these universities, what are the outcomes, the learning outcomes, the opportunities that are available in the industry, the placements, the salaries which are available in campus placements? All these factors are considered under this parameter with a weightage of 20%. Then 10% weightage is given for outreach and inclusivity. Because education is not just about ensuring quality, it's also about ensuring equity. We not only need quality universities and colleges, we need colleges and universities which are inclusive, which give representation for different sections of the Indian society based on gender, based on caste, based on regional factors, to ensure that the weaker sections, the vulnerable, the discarded sections or the oppressed sections, they are brought into mainstream. They are given opportunities for higher education. So ensuring inclusivity is also very important in higher education. So this factor is given a 10% weightage, outreach and inclusivity. Then peer perception has the last 10% weightage. Peer perception is about the reputation of the institution in the eyes of experts, in the eyes of the private companies and industries which go for recruitment. So this is a very subjective opinion. Now, this is where a lot of criticism comes against the NIRF framework. Now, when you look at parameters like teaching, learning, and resources, research and professional practice, graduation outcomes, outreach and inclusivity, these are largely objective based on the data which is collected. It's largely based on facts. But peer perception brings an element of subjectivity. They take the opinions of experts in the domain. They take the views about a university or a college from industry leaders, from private companies which go for recruitment. Now, this factor can be influenced as well from the outside. What if a university tries to bribe experts so that they give a favorable opinion in order to improve their ranking so that they can create a better brand to attract the students? So recently, even Union Minister Dharmendra Pradhan has spoken about the flaw in the NIRF framework, which is the subjectivity which is involved by giving 10% weightage to peer perception. And this has the ability to influence the eventual rankings. So this is one of the flaws which has been pointed out by experts. So please make a note. You might get a mains question asking you to analyze the importance of NIRF, talk about its role, its background, the way in which the rankings are developed, and critically analyze the NIRF framework. So you have to be prepared for such a question. So now that we have studied the role and the background of this framework, the parameters as well, the critical analysis is that there is one major flaw, which is the subjectivity, which is brought in through the 10% weightage, which is given to peer perception. Now, the point is, why are these rankings necessary? First of all, as I said, in global rankings, Indian universities are not ranking in the top 100. The highest ranking Indian institution is IIT Delhi. If I'm not wrong, it holds, I think, 123rd position in the world. So that is the best performing Indian institution at the global level, which means we don't have a single institution in the top 100. So a domestic ranking based on a Indian framework like NIRF will help in building the reputation of our universities. Those institutions which are investing in resources, in capabilities, which are providing for better outcomes, better inclusivity, they can be recognized, and the ranking will not only improve the reputation but pushes them to strive towards better quality in education. It will push universities to invest in setting up research labs and facilities to focus on innovation and research and development. It will also build industry and college or university collaboration, creating more and more opportunities for our students, for researchers, for professors. That is why a ranking system can be very crucial. It can attract the best talent, not just from India, but around the world. Colleges and universities would be able to bring in the best faculties from the world if they have a good rating based on a credible ranking system. It will also build awareness amongst the students. It will make it easier for the students to opt for the right institution. So that is why a ranking framework is very, very important when it comes to higher education. But we need to remember one thing. When it comes to higher education, it's not just about the quality of higher education. As I said, it's also about equity, the principle of equity, ensuring that different sections of the society are getting equal representation. So the editorial is suggesting that the government should not only fix the flaws in the ranking framework, such as the subjectivity brought in by peer perception parameter, but the government should work with higher education sector to ensure that equity is followed and implemented in spirit in our higher education institutions. Now, for example, if you look at India's higher education ecosystem, there is decent representation on the grounds of gender, and as well as when it comes to regional disparity. In this regard, some amount of inclusivity has been ensured, which means adequate number of women candidates are being enrolled into programs, adequate women teachers, female professors are being hired, and also the regional disparity is being addressed in our country in a very decent manner. From different regions, students are able to access good higher education institutions. So in terms of gender and region based disparities, we are doing pretty well when it comes to inclusivity in our higher education. But however, when it comes to caste based and religion based discrimination, when it comes to socio-economic backwardness, there is still a lot left to be achieved in the higher education sector. Because if you look at, let's say, the number of vacancies which are left behind, and if you look at the caste based and religion based data regarding hirings in these universities, you will find that SC/ST communities are grossly underrepresented. This is the reality in our education institutions. I'm not saying it's deliberate, but given the inherent socio-economic backwardness of some communities in India, they are not getting good access to these institutions. They are not getting adequately represented. So there should be a genuine collaborative effort from the government and the universities to ensure that all communities, all sections of the society are represented and given access to higher education institutions based on socio-economic backwardness, minority religions, castes which are considered as to be part of the lower strata of the society who have faced historical oppression and discrimination. These communities deserve greater representation, and this is where our higher education institutions are currently lacking. So it's not just about improving the quality of higher education, it's also about ensuring the principle of equity and inclusivity in our higher education ecosystem. So this is where a ranking framework can make a big difference. It can help you gauge the level of representation and inclusivity and the quality of education which is being imparted. So if you get this point, if you're able to understand this analysis, you will be able to answer any question based on this. In GS paper 2, you can definitely expect a question based on this topic. So let's take up this practice question and let me provide you the answer writing approach so that you can practice your answer writing. The question says NIRF, the National Institutional Ranking Framework, should help improve both quality and equity in higher education. So that's a statement which has been given about NIRF. Evaluate the statement. So how do you start writing an answer for this question? You can start with an introduction where you introduce what is NIRF. So this can be one approach. You can mention that it was introduced in 2016. It's based on this framework that India ranking report is brought out, which grades, ranks our universities, and you can explain its purpose and significance. So this is a very straightforward, factual way of doing it. Or you can try and adopt a different approach. You can point out how no Indian universities are ranked in the top 100 of the world. You can point out this gap that not a single Indian university gets ranked in the top 100, which clearly indicates the gap in our higher education. Also, the need for having our own ranking system and a domestic ranking framework. So you can start with the analysis as your introduction so that you set the stage for explaining what is NIRF, what are the parameters, how is it computed. Then you can discuss its shortcomings. So these are the two approaches you can take. You can take a very factual approach where you simply talk about the background. And the other approach is you provide an analysis at the start, talking about the state of higher education in India. And then you can talk about NIRF. So it's up to you. You can decide as to how you will approach this question. Then in the body, go into the details of the ranking framework. Talk about the parameters, the weightage which has been provided. Explain the significance of the ranking framework. Why does it help the higher education domain? How does it help the industry? Right? Because industry will get to know which colleges are better to hire, to recruit from. It will help students who are looking for admissions. It will help universities build up their reputation. It will push the universities to invest in quality teachers, in quality equipment, and focus on research and innovation. So you need to explain this, explain the significance, and then provide a critical assessment. Express your critical view that the parameter on peer perception is problematic because subjective views of experts and the industry can be manipulated as well. Even an institution which doesn't have great teachers or great research facilities, it can easily buy the influence of the experts and the industry, and it can try to tilt the ranking in its favor just to build up its brand reputation to attract the students. So this is one critical flaw. Then point out the need for ensuring equity in our higher education. It's not just about quality, it's about ensuring inclusivity. Point out that SC/ST community is underrepresented. Socially, educationally backward communities are underrepresented. Religious minorities are underrepresented. So there is a need to increase their participation, their representation in the higher education system. And you can conclude your answer by pointing out that such a ranking framework could become the tool. It could become the instrument to drive a transformation in our higher education, which will not only improve quality of higher education, but will also help improve equity and inclusivity in higher education. So this is the approach you can take. So I hope this is helpful. And please write an answer and let me know as to what is your view on this particular topic in the comment section. Now let's move on to the next article. On page number 6, we have a very interesting column that deals with India's relations with Iran. This column is written by the Iranian ambassador to India. So the article is completely representing the Iranian perspective. So the Iranian ambassador is talking about the civilizational ties between the two countries. He's pointing towards the changing world order and how countries like India and Iran, which have common strategic interests, which have an independent foreign policy, can come together, work together to form the new world order which is taking shape. So, this is the viewpoint being expressed by the author, who is the Iranian ambassador to India. So, let's break this down. Let's understand this in slight detail because India Iran relations are very, very important. Iran is a very important partner for India in the West Asia region. But however, at the end, I will provide a critical assessment. There are few points which I personally don't agree with. Rather, I have a personal issue with what the writer is talking about. So that we'll discuss at the end so that we have a very balanced argument. So first, let's look at the writer's perspective. The Iranian ambassador points out that the world order is shifting right in front of us. Given the policies of United States under President Donald Trump, given the wars and conflicts that are raging, and the economic, social, and environmental challenges that are present in front of the world, clearly we are witnessing a world in chaos, a world in turmoil, which is going through a transformation. And this transformation will lead to the emergence of a new world order. Some experts already believe that we have entered a new world era, and some believe this is going to happen in another few years. So this new world order is marked by the decline of the West. The decline of the West and the rise of new powers. So this is a reference to the rise of China, the dominating role of Russia, the rise of other middle powers like India, Japan, Iran, Turkey, Brazil, and many others. So there are several other countries, global powers like China, Russia, middle powers like India, Japan, Iran, and others, who are now shaping the new world order as we see a clear decline of the West. Maybe the West has not completely declined, but the decline has definitely begun. The West has hit its peak many years ago, and we are clearly seeing a decline of the American European influence. So the writer points out that Western dominance in global geopolitics and in the global economy was primarily because of the Western dominance over global economic systems, which is absolutely correct. The reason why US and Europe have dominated the global order for the last 70 plus years is primarily because they have dominated the global economy by controlling financial institutions like the IMF and the World Bank. It is through this economic control and domination that Western powers have been able to exert their influence. This has been accompanied with their military influence, their cultural influence, and their so-called push for human rights and democracy. They often use the excuse of human rights and democracy to intervene in several other countries. Western countries, they stand accused of carrying out such interventions. And in some cases, they even stand accused of sponsoring terrorism just to serve their geopolitical interests. So the foreign policy of Western powers has been extremely controversial. They leave behind a very controversial legacy. So that is what the writer is pointing towards. These Western powers have blatantly carried out interventions in other countries just because the regimes did not suit their agenda, their interests. Obviously, the Iranian ambassador is referring to the American influence and the American role in Iran. If you remember, in previous sessions, we've discussed this point. In 1951-52, the United States engineered a regime change in Iran. Because after the World War, the Second World War, Iran, which was blessed with hydrocarbon resources, it was looking to nationalize its oil assets under then Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh. He was a nationalist leader looking after Iranian interests. He wanted to nationalize Iranian resources, which until then was controlled by European colonial powers like Britain. So this attempt by Iran to nationalize its wealth and resources was essentially countered by the US, and the CIA carried out a regime change by propping the Shah of the Pahlavi dynasty, and they toppled the Iranian Prime Minister Mossadegh. So a US puppet regime was installed in Iran that lasted from 1952 to 1979. The Shah of Iran, who was installed by the CIA, was essentially a puppet of the United States. So though Iran became a close American ally during the Cold War period, it also saw introduction of progressive, modern social reforms where women had equal rights and there was more freedom in Iran. But the point was, Iran's national interest had been compromised. External foreign power had intervened through covert operations and it had snatched the sovereignty of a smaller, weaker country. Now, this is a shared experience that India also has had with the West. From British colonialism to American intervention, this is something India has also suffered from. The US has been constantly meddling with India since many, many decades. The US was primarily against India's nuclear weapons program and space program. The US and the West in general have aligned more with Pakistan as compared to being aligned with India. The West has more meddled with India's internal issues like Kashmir as well in favor of Pakistan. So India has had a very bitter experience with Western powers, especially during the Cold War period. So this is one sentiment that brings the two countries together, as both countries believe in their foreign policy, which is based on strategic autonomy. See, Iran took a completely different path post 1979. The Shah's regime became very unpopular. In 1979, Iran went through a major revolution, the Iranian Revolution of 1979. The Shah was toppled, but however, the radical Shia clerics who were leading the revolution, they hijacked the movement and they established Iran as a conservative theocracy, turning Iran into a radical, rigid state. The supreme Shia leader, Ayatollah, appointed himself as the supreme leader of Iran. And since then, Iran has been a closed, radical, inward looking conservative country. But Iran maintains its independent foreign policy, quite similar to that of India. Since then, the West became hostile to Iran, as Iran called death to America, death to Israel. And their covert wars and overt wars have been going on since then. So it is this shared experience of India-Iran that the writer is trying to bring out. The problems we have had with Western interventionist policies. So the writer says, it's not just the contemporary ties that bind the two countries together. We have a rich civilizational history, a history of 1,000+ years which binds us together. The Persian civilization, one of the oldest, greatest civilizations, has had a great influence on Indian civilization. And the Iranian ambassador acknowledges the age-old roots of the Indian civilization, one of the oldest, thriving, progressive civilizations, how Indian civilization influenced the Persian values and Persian culture. He makes a reference to the religious connections, the connection through food and people and culture, which has been formed over centuries of interaction between the people of the two regions. This is something that binds the two countries and creates a soft power that brings the two countries naturally together. So the Iranian ambassador says that today India, Iran have a lot of common interests and they should strive to work together. So definitely the Iranian ambassador is absolutely right. He says projects like INSTC corridor, organizations like BRICS and SCO are great platforms for India and Iran to provide leadership and ensure that the global south can shape the new world order. The Iranian leader, the Iranian diplomat in India, he argues that the two countries, they can lead the global south, bring the global south together against Western dominance, and they can shape the new world order together. Because there are plenty of common interests that keep us together. The INSTC project, the International North-South Transport Corridor project, which is a proposed connectivity route linking India with Iran and Russia, and further with Central Asia and Europe, can transform connectivity and trade in the region. So India, Iran can pioneer that project. India has already made big investments in Iran in the Chabahar port project, through which India has established connectivity with Afghanistan and we plan to expand this connectivity further to Central Asia. So Iran is critical for India's ambition to connect with Afghanistan and further with Central Asia, to tap the resources in Afghanistan and Central Asia. So there are plenty of such opportunities. In the past, Iran was one of the top oil suppliers to India. It was amongst the top two oil suppliers before 2018, and India had invested in the oil and gas reserves of Iran as well in the Persian Gulf. More importantly, Iran controls the strategic choke point, the Strait of Hormuz, which is so crucial for global oil shipments. Iran is crucial for India to counter terrorism and to keep a check on Pakistan as well. Since Iran is also affected from terrorism that is based out of Pakistan, sponsored by Pakistan, counter-terrorism is a common objective. Keeping an eye on Pakistan is a common objective of India and Iran. So this makes India and Iran natural partners. So we are not only sharing historical civilizational ties and common interests since the Cold War era, but in today's world, India and Iran are positioned to shape the new world order. I hope you know that Iran has become a member of the BRICS grouping. Iran has become a member of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, these organizations, which are primarily led by Iranian allies, such as Russia and China, they can push towards de-dollarization. The Iranian ambassador is pushing for de-dollarization of the global economy, that is to reduce our dependency on the US dollar. This point, it can be understood. The reason why Iranian ambassador is talking about this is because Iran has been placed under crippling sanctions by the United States, which has been trying to target its nuclear program. Iran says it is not developing nuclear weapons. Iran says its pursuit of nuclear research is only for nuclear energy, for civilian purposes. But as you all know, recently, Israel and United States both have tried bombing Iran's nuclear facilities, as they allege that Iran is secretly building nuclear bombs. So Iran sees this as another interventionist approach of the West. He criticizes US, he criticizes Israel, Israel's policy towards Palestine. He points out and calls out Israel and US for even sponsoring terrorist entities across West Asia and for destabilizing the West Asia region. So you can agree with these arguments being made by the Iranian ambassador. From Islamic State to Hayat Tahrir al-Sham in Syria, to the conflicts in Lebanon to Yemen, US and Israel have been involved in working with extremist and terrorist organizations as well when it suits their interests. In many ways, US, Israel, and their allies are responsible for the destabilization of West Asia. So on all these points, the Iranian ambassador is absolutely right. Now let me tell you where I disagree with this article. The Iranian ambassador, obviously, he is the official representative, the envoy of Iran. He will represent Iranian interests, but he is missing some key points which you don't find in the article. The points which you need to note down is that, make a note of this and let me know what you think. This is my personal take on this article. The Iranian ambassador is correctly criticizing US, Israel, and others for destabilizing West Asia, for sponsoring terrorism, for aligning with terrorist groups as well. But the Iranian ambassador doesn't acknowledge Iran's own involvement in sponsoring radical extremist groups and terrorist groups. He makes no mention of Iran backing extremist groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis. These have been Iranian proxies, and Iran has used them to target Israel and United States and their interests in West Asia to destabilize the region. More importantly, the Iranian ambassador doesn't talk about the oppression of women and the erosion of human rights in Iran post 1979. See, I totally agree and sympathize with the Iranian ambassador when he says that US had meddled in Iran since 1950s and it had eroded the national interests of Iran. But after the Iranian Revolution, what happened? Radical Shia clerics took control of power, turned Iran into a radical conservative theocratic state. They've oppressed women. They've eroded human rights, targeted religious minorities. So the space for democracy, the space for civil society has been completely eroded in Iran. and the Iranian ambassador makes no mention of this. Is that clear? So this is one major issue that a country like India would have. India being an open democracy, oppression of women, erosion of human rights, erosion of democratic principles is something that we can't just ignore. Then the next point is even more important. You can say, sir, this is too idealistic. You can't be idealistic in foreign policy. Okay, let's ignore this point as well. But the Iranian ambassador is correctly pointing out the threat posed by US Israel to Iranian interests. He acknowledges that India also faces hostile threats. So he says India Iran should work together to counter these hostile threats. But conveniently, the Iranian ambassador, he basically misses to explicitly mention which are those hostile threats to India. He's not mentioning Pakistan or China being a hostile threat to India. He's not being explicit over here. Now, this again is a lesson in diplomacy for you. Obviously, he's a seasoned diplomat. This is diplomatic tact. So it's a live case study for you, for civil service aspirants, those who are aspiring to enter the Indian Foreign Service. Look how beautifully he has crafted this article. He has highlighted the common connection and interest between India and Iran, pointed out the common concerns and interests, while ensuring that he doesn't label anyone who could be close to Iran. Because Iran, Pakistan do share a close relationship. Though they have some problems between them, he ensures he doesn't name Pakistan, though Pakistan is a state sponsor of terrorism. He doesn't name China explicitly. He just says, yes, India also faces some hostile threats. We also have these hostile threats, so we should work together. Now, this is diplomatic finesse, diplomatic tact. But the point is, Iran has its own working relationship with countries like Pakistan and China, which sometimes creates problems for India. And more importantly, Iran sometimes has aligned with Pakistan on our internal matters like Kashmir. When Pakistan tries to internationalize the Kashmir issue at United Nations or Organization of Islamic Cooperation, sometimes Iran has sided with Pakistan and voted against India. There have been instances in the past where the Ayatollah has spoken about Kashmir, though it's an internal matter of India. So this is not acceptable to India as well. So these are 3 points where we have to differ with the writer. But other than that, the ambassador is absolutely right that India-Iran share a historical relationship. We have common strategic interests. So there are a lot of opportunities for us to collaborate and work together. So that is what we take away from this article, a critical assessment. So based on this, take up this practice question, try to practice your answer writing. Now let's move on to another important article in today's newspaper on India-China boundary issue. If you have been seeing the Hindu newspaper for the past 3 days, the Hindu has been basically carrying out a 3-part series on India-China boundary issues. Yesterday, we had a discussion on this. We spoke about the 1993 and 1996 boundary agreements. I hope all of you remember this. So the article in yesterday's paper was the second article in a 3-part series. So yesterday, we have covered the 93 and 96 boundary agreements. And today, we have the third and final article in this series, which mainly focuses on the special representative mechanism, the SR mechanism, which I was mentioning yesterday. So let's briefly look at this article and then we will move on towards the smaller articles in today's paper. The article mainly focuses on the role of Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee in early 2000 in shaping the new era in India-China relations. Because see, under Prime Minister Vajpayee, India-China relations went through a lot of ups and downs. In 1998, when India carried out the Pokhran nuclear tests, obviously India's nuclear program was aimed at China, creating a nuclear deterrence against China's nuclear weapons. So China was furious when India carried out the Pokhran nuclear tests. The relations got downgraded after that. China even supported United States and other Western countries in the sanctions that they imposed on India through UN Resolution 1172. Please make a note of this. Through UN Security Council Resolution 1172, China, US, and few other permanent members, including UK. These 3 permanent members pushed this resolution, bringing sanctions on India and placing economic and technological sanctions on India. So this was one of the lowest points in India-China relationship. But very quickly, Prime Minister Vajpayee managed to repair and rebuild this relationship. Prime Minister Vajpayee was a man of diplomatic tact. He was someone who sought good relations with our neighbors. He realized how important China is. Since his days as an external affairs minister, Vajpayee was external affairs minister back in the 70s. Since then, Vajpayee firmly believed that we should have good ties with our neighbors, particularly with a large neighbor like China. So, following this decline in the relationship after the Pokhran tests, from early 2000, Prime Minister Vajpayee carried out a reset with China. PM Vajpayee visited Beijing and managed to achieve a reset, and China finally recognized Sikkim as an integral part of India. By 2003 2005, in this period, China formally gave recognition to Sikkim as an integral part of India. Because when Sikkim merged with India in 1975, China had refused to recognize this merger. Then, following this, India China established the special representative mechanism to take forward the boundary discussions. The SR mechanism was initiated, and the two leaders appointed their special representatives. Prime Minister Vajpayee appointed his national security advisor, the first NSA of India, Brajesh Mishra, as the envoy from India, as the SR. China appointed a senior diplomat who acts as the national security advisor, the state counselor. So since then, the SR talks progressed, and in 2005, they achieved a big breakthrough. The special representatives agreed that there should be a set of political parameters that should guide the boundary negotiations. That we should not fight about the boundary issue, rather we should engage in talks, and those political parameters were defined and they were codified through the 2005 agreement when the political parameters were identified under the special representative mechanism. So this was a very big breakthrough. The talks were progressing very well, but from 2007 onwards, the SR talks were sidelined by China, and China started getting more hostile and aggressive against India. But to understand what happened, what was the progress under the SR talks and what's happening right now, we need to look at the provisions of these political parameters that were agreed between India and China in the year 2005. So let me provide you some insight into this. See, in 2005, when India-China finalized the political parameters under the SR mechanism, they both agreed that they will consider the idea to swap the disputed territories. Remember, yesterday I told you, when the idea of swapping Aksai Chin for Arunachal Pradesh was proposed in 1950s by China, it was vehemently rejected by then Prime Minister Nehru. But gradually, both India and China came to the realization that there's no point in fighting over these territories. Rather, India and China had other priorities to uplift their people, to grow their economies and partner with each other. So by 1980s and 1990s, there was a realization that India and China needed each other. They needed to support each other. So there was a focus, a priority by both the countries to try and resolve the boundary issue without fighting about it. So one practical solution has always been the idea to swap a part of Aksai Chin claimed by China for Arunachal Pradesh in return. So India was showing some willingness. I'm not saying this was publicly announced. This was largely a part of the talks and negotiations that were taking place. The Vajpayee government and later the Manmohan Singh government, now the Modi government, also have considered the idea of ending the boundary issue forever by working out such an arrangement where China's interests are also taken care of, India's interests are also taken care of. Essentially reaching a compromise, which is much, much better. You might think you're ceding territory, you're losing to China. No, think of it this way. Look at the other alternative. If India, China end this boundary issue, make this a normal international border, can you imagine the potential for India-China collaboration? Can you imagine what India and China can do together as friends, as partners, instead of being rivals and being hostile to each other? So governments are very sensible in that regard. Leaders are very sensible. So the idea is to work out a compromise which is reasonable for both the sides, which is fair to both the countries, and ensure that we progress, we proceed in our relationship. So this idea was being considered. I'm not saying it was implemented or finalized. The idea of swapping the territory and arriving at some sort of a conclusion to delineate the boundary was being considered in the early 2000s. But some ground rules were laid down. A Lakshman Rekha was drawn, a red line was drawn. India defined its Lakshman Rekha, China defined its Lakshman Rekha. so that these Lakshman Rekhas or red lines will not be breached. For China, it's about guaranteeing its strategic interests in Aksai Chin. See, China definitely has strategic interests in Aksai Chin because it connects Tibet with Xinjiang, the two frontier provinces where China has had internal problems. As China annexed these territories forcefully, there has been an internal rebellion in Tibet, in Xinjiang, which continues to this day. So Aksai Chin is very critical to connect these two frontier regions. And from a security perspective, from a military perspective, Aksai Chin is very critical. And the highways that pass through it, especially the G219 highway, one of the world's longest highways, is strategically very important for China. So there is an article under the political parameters that were agreed that says that the strategic and reasonable interests of both sides would be given consideration when the boundary dispute is settled. So this was basically a subtle reference that India someday might be okay to give a part of Aksai Chin to China to fulfill the reasonable strategic interests of China. In return, what will we get? In return, India extracted a guarantee, a commitment that the interests of the border population, the settled population, would be protected. Which means the border villages of India, from Ladakh to Arunachal Pradesh, especially in the eastern sector, this would not be altered. The boundary would not be changed in such a way that it would affect the Indian settled population. So this will protect India's territorial claims across most of the stretch of the border, except for a small part in Aksai Chin. So this guarantee was also included that the interests of the settled border population will never be touched. So this was a win-win situation for both. China's security interests will be taken care of by giving maybe small part of Aksai Chin. India's interest will be taken care of by settling the boundary dispute and ensuring that the border population is not disturbed. But however, things started changing from 2007. Interestingly, what happened? Chinese foreign minister, then Chinese foreign minister, met with India's then foreign minister Pranab Mukherjee in Berlin and made a very controversial statement. He said, China is not bound by the commitment which was made with regard to not disturbing the border population, which basically meant China is not going to respect India's claims over Arunachal Pradesh, particularly at Tawang, which has always been a place of great interest for China. Because Tawang provides access to India's northeast. And Tawang is home to a very important Buddhist monastery, the Gelugpo Buddhist monastery, which plays an important role in Tibetan Buddhist politics. And China wants to keep an eye on these developments. So when this statement was made by the Chinese foreign minister, it clearly pointed out that China is making a U-turn. It's going back on its commitments. It was basically saying that it can't guarantee to India that the interests of border population would be protected all the time. It was an indirect reference that China will not respect India's claims on Arunachal Pradesh, especially on Tawang. Now, why did this happen? Why did this big break happen? Why did China take a sudden U-turn? This is related to the Malabar exercise. The then Prime Minister Manmohan Singh expanded the vision of Malabar exercise by inviting Japan, Australia, and Singapore. Until then, Malabar was a bilateral naval exercise between India and US. Now, please understand, by then, India-US relationship had become very strong. India-US had signed the civil nuclear deal in 2005, and US had started supplying advanced military hardware to India. US was looking at India as a counterbalance to China. So at that point, when India invited Japan, Australia, and Singapore and held a multilateral naval exercise, so in the eyes of China, this was seen as India's betrayal. From China's perspective, it believed that India was aligning with US and it was becoming part of this military alliance to counter China and to contain China. So since then, China started breaking its commitments. China got more and more aggressive, and the SR talks completely broke down in 2009. Especially after President Obama announced the pivot to Asia policy, and the US started pivoting towards the Asia Pacific. Under the pivot to Asia policy, US started realigning its diplomatic and military deployments, focusing more on the Indo-Pacific to contain China, and India was a key partner for the US. So since then, the India-China relations broke down. China went back on its boundary commitments. That is when we started seeing the boundary incursions. From 2009 to 2014, we saw multiple incursions taking place in Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, and Tawang sectors. For example, the incursions in Chumar. Then came the Doklam crisis in 2017 involving Bhutan. And then came the Ladakh crisis and standoff in 2020. So it is all connected. Are you able to see how these events are interrelated? Why China became aggressive and hostile in the last 14, 15 years is because of these developments that had taken place. Understood? So now the writer says that since some normalcy is coming back in the relationship, Ladakh standoff has been resolved. And India, China have restarted the SR talks, which I mentioned yesterday as well. Since the normalcy of last year, which was achieved at the Kazan BRIC summit, India, China have restarted the SR talks, and the 24th round of SR talks took place last year. Now the 25th round of SR talks has taken place, which means India, China are making fresh progress. Right now, according to experts, India, China have come to an agreement that in the central sector, especially between Sikkim and Tibet, we have no boundary issues. So this is something that can be finalized immediately. You can expect this to happen maybe by next year, when India, China might announce some sort of final conclusion, declaring that we have no disputes and no issues in the central sector, particularly between the borders between Sikkim and Tibet. So once this is done, then we might discuss the eastern and western sectors, where if everything goes well, if things come back to some normalcy between India and China, if the political environment is stable in both countries, and if the political leadership has the willingness, you might see a possible final deal, which is what has been planned for many decades. A sort of a swap where India will give up a part of Oxygen, right, to address China's interests. In return, ensure that rest of the boundary is delineated, and that could be seen as a small compromise. As I said, your views might differ. You might say that India is giving up, that we are ceding territory, but that is how it works in international relations. To have a stable relationship, sometimes you need to have a reasonable compromise. But this is, again, it's all just speculation. It may not really happen on the ground because the political pressure would be so much that neither governments would be able to agree to a swap. Particularly in India, there would be so much pressure on the government that even though it's the most practical thing to do, the government may not be able to do it because of the tremendous pressure concerning sovereignty. But having some awareness about this is something that will help you to better understand our ties with such an important neighbor. Now, coming to the smaller articles, the Supreme Court has ordered the Election Commission of India to consider Aadhaar as a proof of identity. Now, this is a very important order passed with the Supreme Court. See, recently, Election Commission of India conducted the SAR exercise in Bihar, the special intensive revision of the electoral rolls. Out of the 7.89 crore voting population, around 65 lakh voters, they were deleted. They were excluded from the voters list. Correct? I'm sure all of you are aware of this. So now those who have been excluded, they have a chance to appeal. They can claim that they are legitimate voters and they can try to get included. They can try to get their names added based on verification of proof. So Election Commission has notified a set of 11 documents. So the people of Bihar should possess some of these documents to prove that they're not just citizens of India, but they're also the legitimate voters in that constituency, so that their names can get enrolled in the voters list. Now, there is a petition in front of the Supreme Court that why only these 11 documents? And what is quite concerning is that in this list of 11 documents being considered by the Election Commission, Aadhaar is not being considered. Not as proof of citizenship, because Aadhaar is never a proof of citizenship. I hope all of you are aware of it. Aadhaar is just a proof of residency. If you have Aadhaar, it means you're an Indian resident. That's it. So it can be a proof of identity, but Election Commission has said will not consider it. So then what's the whole point of giving out a unique identification number? That's why the Supreme Court has said that we accept your point that Aadhaar is not a proof of citizenship. Correct. The legal constitutional position is very clear on this. There has been a Supreme Court ruling on this as well, that Aadhaar is not a proof of citizenship. But Aadhaar is a proof of residency. It's a proof of identity. So that's why the Supreme Court has directed the Election Commission to consider including Aadhaar as the 12th document in the ongoing exercise, where those voters who have been excluded, who are appealing against it, who are trying to claim that they are legitimate voters, they should be allowed to provide Aadhaar as a proof of identity. Because see, in this list of 11 documents, only two of them can be considered as proof of citizenship, which is your passport and your birth certificate. Only these two are proof of citizenship. There are 9 documents which are not proof of citizenship, but proof of identity, which is being accepted by Election Commission. So Supreme Court has pointed out this very same point, that if you already have 9 documents which you are accepting as proof of identity and they're not proof of citizenship, why not include Aadhaar as well? Nobody is saying use Aadhaar to verify citizenship, but use Aadhaar as an identity proof, as a residency proof. So Election Commission has now been ordered with the Supreme Court to spread awareness about this as well. Because on the ground, the electoral registration officers, the booth level officers, they are not accepting Aadhaar on the ground. And those who have accepted Aadhaar, they have been penalized by the Election Commission. So that's why the Supreme Court has intervened, ordered the Election Commission to accept Aadhaar as a 12th document, just as a proof of identity, and ensure that officers are informed about this on the ground. And the people should be aware as well, right? So the Election Commission has ordered the government to spread awareness about this so that voters in Bihar will know that a 12th document is also acceptable, which is Aadhaar, which they can provide as proof of identity. So this is something you should make a note of. Then coming to Northeast India, there's an article on page number 10. Naga groups have announced a blockade of a critical highway and trade route, and they're declaring a trade embargo. So this is like a deja vu moment. This used to happen some years ago. More than a decade ago, Naga groups were known to blockade a critical highway, which is the sole link between Manipur and rest of India. I'm referring to NH2, a key highway passing from Assam to Nagaland, then towards Manipur. Now look at the map here. This important highway that runs from Nagaland into Manipur is a lifeline for Manipur, which links Manipur with rest of the country. Now, historically, we have seen such incidents, especially Naga insurgent groups like NSCN, the Isaac Muiwa faction of NSCN. They were known to blockade these roads and highways leading to Manipur. They would cripple Manipur whenever Naga issue had to be highlighted. Before the Naga peace process was initiated, whenever these insurgent groups and Naga political groups had a concern, had a grievance against the government of India, they would block these roads to Manipur. They would even extract illegal tax or toll from the trucks and vehicles passing through. Because some of these insurgents often behave like criminal gangs. They're involved in organized criminal activity as well. So they collect these illegal so-called taxes on the ground, stopping the traffic and collecting these illegal tolls from all the trucks and vehicles. And they would block the highway and cripple the economy of Manipur, creating a crisis in Manipur. There would be shortage of food, medicines, petrol and diesel. And this would create an uproar, which would bring pressure on the government of India, pushing the government to talk to the Naga insurgents and the Naga political groups. So this has been an age-old strategy. And now we are seeing a return of this. Because few days ago, Prime Minister Modi has announced his upcoming visit to Manipur, to the violence-hit state. And PM Modi is expected to visit Manipur in few days on 13 September to Churchandpur. And in the run-up to this, the Home Ministry has signed the suspension of operations agreement with the Kuki-Zo armed groups, basically declaring a ceasefire and bringing the violence to some sort of a halt to bring some stability and normalcy. So in this backdrop, Naga groups have announced a trade embargo and a blockade of this highway because Kuki-Zo groups, which were blocking this highway, they had announced that they will allow the reopening of this highway. Now, why are Naga groups doing this? Because see, in Manipur, it's a multi-ethnic state. It's not just the Meiteis and the Kukis. You also have the Nagas in the hill areas. Correct? Now, the Naga community has always had two major issues. One issue is with the free movement regime. The other issue is with border fencing on the India-Myanmar border. Because please understand, the Naga community, the Naga ethnic group is spread out across this region. They are found not just in Nagaland, they are found in Manipur, Arunachal Pradesh, parts of Mizoram as well. They are found in the neighboring country of Myanmar, in the Sagaing region. This would be the Sagaing division of Myanmar. So here as well, subgroups of Nagas are found. So both in India and Myanmar, Naga ethnic community can be found. So Nagas strongly believe that their ethnic group was divided by the British era border that was drawn here between India and then Burma, which later became the international border between India and Myanmar. In fact, the demand of Naga insurgents, be it the Naga National Council or insurgent groups like NSCN, their demand has always been to create a greater Naga limb, to unite all the Naga areas to create a so-called greater Naga land. So that includes the Naga areas in Myanmar as well. Now, to facilitate the cross-border linkages between the Naga community and other tribes, because several tribes have cross-border ties, India-Myanmar had implemented a free movement regime. Up to 16 kilometers on both sides of the border, those residing in the border villages could freely travel across with a border pass for up to 1 year. So this allowed for border trade. It allowed for people-to-people relations, cultural ties. But following the ethnic violence in Manipur, where part of the violence was blamed, it was basically placed on the Zomi migrants and refugees who came from Myanmar to Manipur. Their ties with the Kuki group was blamed for it largely. Following this, the Home Ministry declared that free movement regime would be suspended. Right? Union Home Minister Amit Shah declared that free movement regime would be completely suspended. But it has never been really suspended. It has only been reduced in its implementation. From previous 16 kilometers, now it has been reduced to 10 kilometers. And 10 kilometers from the border, the communities present here in the border villages can move across with a border pass, and they have provided for a proper registration system right now. The government maintains better registration and surveillance of Myanmar citizens coming to India and Indian citizens going to Myanmar. But Naga groups oppose this, because if the free movement regime ends or if it is constrained, it will affect the rights of these communities, their right to move around, engage in cross-border trade, maintain their cross-border ties. And also the Home Ministry declared that we will fence the entire border, and the fencing project has already started. The border guarding force, Assam Rifles, has already started the fencing project of this 1,643 kilometer border, which is opposed by the tribes such as Nagas. Ethnic groups like Nagas and others are opposing it, because if there is a fenced border, it will affect their cross-border movement. So on these grounds, Naga groups are declaring a blockade. They're imposing a trade embargo to try and blockade Manipur and bring pressure on the union government again. So that is the development you should be aware of. Next, remember yesterday we spoke about the disruption in internet caused by the cutting of the undersea cables in Red Sea. So there is an update on this. The cutting of these submarine cables in the Red Sea did cause a lot of disruption, especially for the internet traffic between India and Europe. Though internet traffic has not been completely suspended, we are seeing an increased latency, which has been causing concern. See, latency is the time taken for a data packet to travel from one point to another. Now, anywhere in the world, the latency is usually less than 1 second, be it from India to US or India to Russia. If you're sending a data packet, the latency is usually always in milliseconds. It's always less than a second. Generally, between India and Europe, the latency was in the range of 110 milliseconds to maybe 150 milliseconds. Now, because of the disruption which has happened, where important submarine cables have been cut, the latency has doubled to almost 300 milliseconds. So when you're making online transactions, or let's say you're making a video call, you will see a slight increase in that latency in the delay that you experience, right? So this is because important critical submarine cables have been cut. For example, the SEA MEWE4. Make a note of this. It's one of the most important submarine cables in the world. It connects Southeast Asia with Middle East and Western Europe and passes through India. This critical cable has been cut. Another important cable is the IMEWE, India, Middle East, West Europe cable. These two critical cables have been cut. And as a result, Indian telecom and internet companies like Reliance, Tata, Airtel, which depend on it, their communication has been affected and the latency has slightly gone up. But they are still managing it because they immediately rerouted the traffic to other submarine cables. See, India has multiple submarine cables. I told you, right, in Mumbai and Chennai. This is where we have our submarine landing points, the cable landing points. There are more than a dozen strategically important submarine cables that head from Mumbai towards West Asia, Europe, and Africa. There are very important submarine cables that head from Chennai towards Southeast Asia and Australia region. This is what connects India to the rest of the world. And these are strategic assets in today's digital world. Because as I told you yesterday, remember last year, a similar disruption had happened when the Houthi rebels of Yemen had deliberately sabotaged submarine cables, causing internet outage. Right now, we don't know the exact reason. As of now, the exact cause behind this recent disruption is not known. This can happen naturally as well. Or let's say when a ship collides with the submarine cable, there could be a rupture, or when a large fish probably breaks it apart. It's a possibility. So it could be an accident, it could be sabotage, we don't know. But you should understand that this has economic and geopolitical consequences. Now, coming to the prelim section, let's take a quick look. Kerala, which is known for having superior health indicators and development indicators, has seen a sudden surge in its MMR, maternal mortality rate. You often would have studied that Kerala has the best maternal mortality rate along with Andhra Pradesh. They occupy the first spot. Now, what is MMR? MMR is a key health indicator. Maternal mortality rate is basically the number of maternal deaths per 1 lakh live births in a given year. So how do you calculate this? It's a fraction where you have maternal deaths as the numerator and the number of live births in the denominator multiplied by a factor of 1 lakh. This is how your MMR ratio is calculated. Now, Kerala always had a good maternal mortality ratio because of its superior healthcare infrastructure. You can see in the graph how over the years Kerala had brought around a steep decline in its MMR, and its MMR was in the range of 18 to 19 to 20 in the last few years. But suddenly it has spiked to 30. There is a sudden surge from 18 to 30. So why is this happening? This is happening not because of more maternal deaths, but because live births are decreasing in Kerala. Remember, yesterday we had a discussion on demography, right? I told you Kerala has the highest aging population and it is also seeing a decline in birth rate. In Kerala, live births have dropped. Previously, the average number of live births in Kerala was 5 to 5.5 lakhs per year. Now, this has declined to less than 4 lakhs. It is expected that Kerala's live births will further drop to 3.5 lakh live births per year. So what happens because of this? When the denominator decreases and the numerator remains stagnant, maternal deaths have almost been stagnant at around 30, 32. So as a result of this, there is a surge in MMR ratio. During COVID-19, maternal deaths did increase, but it was a abnormal period. Because of COVID-19, few pregnant women, they lost their lives. So that was basically a abnormal phase. If you take that out, maternal deaths have largely been constant in Kerala over the past decade and more. But live births have been dropping and declining. The denominator is going down. So obviously ratio will shoot up. So it's not that suddenly Kerala's healthcare system has taken a hit. No, it's essentially an indicator of dropping live births, which in turn affects the MMR ratio. So that's what we learned from this article. Next, on page 9, there's an article explaining two-factor authentication, which ensures better safety and security in the digital space. What is two-factor authentication? Let's get a basic idea. You don't have to go into all the technical details. It's not needed for the exam. The article does provide a lot of technical details. It's not necessary. Just understand what is two-factor authentication. How does it work? Now, whenever you access secure online services, it could be your email or any social media app or your banking transactions, or when you're sending money to someone else or investing in the share markets. To access any of these online portals, one way of securing our data and details is through a password. right? Every username has a unique password, a password which is known only to us, hopefully, right? The whole idea of password is based on this concept that I know my password, no one else will know it, ideally, and only I will have access to my account. But in today's world, this alone is not enough because there are methods through which hackers can get to know what's your password. They can ensure that they can either buy the passwords which have been hacked or which is being sold on the dark net, or they can figure out through these essentially cyber threats, through cyber scams, and they will get hold of your passwords. So if they have access to your password, they could possibly log into your account and essentially steal your funds, steal your data, manipulate the transactions as well. So to ensure greater security, what tech companies have done, they've introduced a second factor of authentication. It's not just about what you know, it's about what you have, what something only you have. This is where the concept of OTP comes into picture. One-time password. A password which has a short duration, a short shelf life, which will expire in few seconds, and only I will have access to it at that point. So let's say I'm trying to log in. I enter my username and password, correct? But this alone is not enough. It'll ask for a second authentication, which is what you have, which is my device, my mobile phone. So I'll get a OTP and it'll be valid only for a few seconds. If I enter that OTP, then I'm authenticated as the genuine user and I'll get access to my account. Even if a hacker tries to get hold of it, it's going to be very difficult because they have to simultaneously have access to my phone and the OTPs which are being received on it. Let's say a hacker has my username and password, but if they don't have access to my phone and the OTPs which are being received, they can't access the account because of this enhanced security which is provided. Today, there are many other ways of two-factor and three-factor authentication. There is something known as TOTP, time-based OTPs. You have these apps, for example, Google Authenticator. I'm sure many of you must be using it. They use high-level encryption and hash functions to generate a real-time code, which is synchronized with your application. And once you enter that code, only then you will have access to your device. This is widely used by corporate organizations as well, where authenticator code or authenticator device is given, which generates these unique codes in real time. And there is a sync between the platform and the device you have. So once you enter the correct code, only then you will get access to it. So this added feature of security has enhanced cybersecurity. It has made hacking into accounts much more difficult and almost impossible sometimes. So this is the advantage of having two-factor authentication. Today, you also have three-factor authentication, where even biometrics is added, where you need a facial recognition or a thumb or a fingerprint, along with your password and along with the OTP which you are going to provide. Coming to the last article, Prime Minister Modi is going to inaugurate the Combined Commanders Conference in Kolkata. What is the Combined Commanders Conference? This is the apex forum on security defense matters involving the civilian and military leadership of India. So at this conference, the service chiefs will be present, the Chief of Army, Navy, Air Force, the Chief of Defense Staff, the highest ranking military officer would also be present, and the senior commanders of all the three services would also be present, along with civilian leaders, be it from the paramilitary forces, right, which are headed usually by IPS officers who are civilian officers. Then intelligence agencies like IB, RAW, NTRO, which are also headed by civilian officers. So all these security forces and agencies will come together for the Combined Commanders Conference, which includes the highest political leadership as well. And this conference will be inaugurated by the Prime Minister. The theme for this year is Year of Reforms, Transforming for the Future, improving our operational preparedness and reforming our defense and armed forces to step up our defense preparedness. So just make a note of this fact. And on this note, I bring my discussion to an end. I hope you guys have understood everything, enjoyed the session. If you did, please let me know through the comments. Don't forget to press the like button and don't forget to subscribe to our channel as well. That is it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.